Today I'm going to be showing you guys how I edit my photos in Lightroom Classic. So now that I'm in Lightroom Classic, I can now show you guys my editing workflow for my photography. So what I usually do first after a day of shooting is I'll go over to the library section and import all of my photos from my drives, so from my SD card or whatever it may be, and then I import them into Lightroom Classic, and then I will sort through all the photos and flag the ones that I want to edit and eventually post to my website or my social media. So now that we're back in the Develop tab, the first thing I usually do is I will look at the color temperature, and I use auto white balance, so usually it's fine. The camera interprets the white balance just perfectly fine. So with this image, it looks great, but sometimes I might have to change that just a little bit, make it a bit colder or a bit warmer, but it depends on what picture it is. But for the most part, the camera handles it just perfectly. So now moving on to the exposure. The exposure on this image is great. There's nothing that needs to be changed, but sometimes if I underexpose the image just a little bit, because it was a quick shot and I usually shoot in manual mode, so if it's a quick shot and I didn't have time to change my settings to get the perfect exposure, then I can edit it here. But since this image is just fine, I can move on to the contrast, and I usually up the contrast by about 10 to 20 points. So about 15 for this image looks pretty good. And I can move on to the highlights. So the highlights on this image are maybe a bit harsh, so I'm going to kind of take them down by about -20. And then with the shadows, I like a contrastier looking image. That's kind of my style. So I'm going to drag these down to about -20. With the whites, I'm going to bring them up by about +10. And then with the blacks, about -10, I think is pretty good, because we're going to be editing this again in the tone curve, so we can make it look a bit more darker or brighter down in that section. So after that, then we have the presence selectors. So the only one I usually use is the clarity slider, and that's only on a select few images, and I'm just going to up it by like about +5 or +10, and that kind of just makes it a bit more clear and kind of sharpens it up. But for this image, I don't really want to put it on, so I'm just going to leave it as is. And then with the vibrance and saturation sliders, sometimes I will usually just up them by about +10 or so, and I'll either do it in the beginning or I will go through my saturation in the color tab and saturate all the individual colors, and then when I'm about finished, I will come back up here and then edit the vibrance and saturation at the end. So now that we're done with the vibrance and saturation, we can move on to the tone curve. So with the shadows, I usually drag them down to about -20 or -30. I think about -30 looks pretty good here. And with the tone curve, I'm trying to get an S shape on the graph itself. So with the darks, I'll put it to about -10. With the lights, I'll do about +15. Highlights can be about +10. And you guys can see that it's like an S curve in the graph right here. Just with how I've changed the different values, it forms kind of an S. So that's usually what I aim for when working on my tone curve. So after the tone curve, I'm going to move on down to the color tabs. And I usually ignore the hue section and the luminance section. They can be useful sometimes, but I just feel like it makes my image look too artificial if I end up changing these. So I usually just focus on the individual saturation. So on this image, I got a lot of red, I got a lot of orange and yellow, and some blue. So basically I'm going to focus on those primary colors. So with the red, I'm going to up it by about 30, 35. That looks pretty good. It makes the red pop on the brick and also the Pepsi Cola sign. And then I'm going to move on to the orange, probably move it up about +35, and that looks pretty good. You're seeing the saturation really come out now. It's making the image look just fantastic. And now with the yellow, I'm going to up it to about the same amount, about plus 40. And then with the green, we're just going to ignore that because there's no green that I can see in the image. Same with the aqua. However, the aqua I could raise maybe a little bit just because sometimes it might detect like blue as aqua, so you can just be safe if you want to get some more saturation. And I'm just going to raise the blue to about plus 50. Looks pretty good. You can see the saturation on the image is like the color is just really popping now. You can see it in the sky, and you can see it definitely in this very colorful sign and this colorful brick. So after the saturation, I move on to sometimes like the sharpness and the noise reduction. For this image, I don't really need to reduce the noise. The noise reduction slider is really great and helpful for night photography, or if you had to shoot with like a high ISO or something and there's lots of noise in your image, it looks like kind of grainy. This will kind of soften it up, but will also reduce the noise that you're getting. So it's kind of a trade-off. You get less detail, but you're getting less noise, so you're getting like less of a grainy effect. So you have to find a balance when you're using the noise reduction slider, but it is a very helpful tool. And then with the sharpening, I have my Lightroom set up to automatically sharpen my photos by about 40 points, like low 40 on the slider there. So that automatically applies to all of my images. And I know you can turn that function off, like that feature off in Lightroom Classic. However, I just have it on, and I've always had it on, and I've had no real issue with it in my editing workflow. I've never really had it add much more noise or anything. And the sharpness, it looks natural, it looks good. So I usually just leave it on, and I rarely sharpen my images. I usually, if I am going to like sharpen or try to add clarity, I'm going to use the clarity slider at the very top of the settings, just over here in the presence section. I'm going to use that instead of adding sharpness. So now that we are done talking about the noise reduction and sharpening, like I said, for this image, we don't need any of those. It's just automatically sharpening it a little bit for me. We can move to the lens corrections. I usually check these boxes to remove chromatic aberrations and also to enable profile corrections. And it's using the built-in profile. So at the top, you can see my EXIF details. So it's a 15mm focal length at f1.7. You also have the ISO and the shutter speed. But this is my Leica 15mm lens for my Panasonic G9. And it's basically using that lens profile because it's built in to the camera. When I take the picture, it already applies the corrections. And you can see down here that it says the built-in lens profile has been applied. So it's going to reduce the chromatic aberration, which is like purple fringing, like a little purple color on high contrast areas. So a dark area with like a white, like bright white sky, it's gonna maybe have that effect, but checking these off kind of helps it. And then after that, I just usually sometimes will go to the transform tab. If I want to level my image, if it's not level, I have all my metering on in my Lumix G9. So if I was unable to level a shot just handheld, let's say it was a quick shot or something, and I didn't have time to set up the level, then I can do it in post-production. So I can level it here, and then sometimes I could also level it with the auto function and also correct the perspective. But for this image, it looks perfectly fine and doesn't need any editing, so I'm just going to leave that as is. And then sometimes I will also add a vignette. So I will do probably about -10 vignette if I do add one. It's kind of subtle, but you can still notice it brings some focus to the subject and to the center of the image, and also adds some contrast. But for this image and this photo, I think it's just fine without. You also have grain sliders, which I never use. So yeah, this is basically the completed image, except for the sky. So in my opinion, the sky is a bit overexposed, a bit too much highlight going on, and it kind of detracts from the subject because it's so bright up here in the corner and the top part of the image. So to basically fix that highlight issue in the sky, I can create a mask and click select sky, and it will automatically select the sky in the image. And then from here, all of these sliders and functions will basically only apply to this mask, which will apply to the sky. So I can go in here and kind of drop down the highlights. So that's -100. I usually don't try to kill the highlights like that. It might be a bit too much, but I think it's kind of necessary for this. And it's technically not like completely taking out the highlights from the image, it's just from the sky. And the sky still does have some highlights because we've also edited the highlights in the regular functions and selectors. So I think this looks pretty good. You can see that with -100, we're getting a lot more detail, a lot more blue in the sky. So this is -100, and then this is going back up to -0, or not -0, just 0. You can see how much brighter it is, how much less like detail and color there is. And this is -100, way more detail, more color. It just looks way better. And I'm just going to finally move down the exposure to -0.2, and this looks very good. So this is basically the completed image, the completed edit, and the entire process and workflow that I would do for most of my photos. This is kind of the look that I like to go for, and this is the set of kind of list of things that I do like in order to edit my images like this. And quickly we can just look at a before of the image. It's very washed out, it's a raw file. There's not much color, not much saturation. The tone is just like pretty flat. And then this is the after. So this is the edit with it all applied. Lots of color, it's very vibrant, and also the contrast and saturation and everything just looks very, very good. So now that the image is all finished and ready to go, I will just export my edited images that are all complete into my liking, and I will upload them to my website or to my social media platforms. This image I've actually already posted on my social media and my website. My website is bmintram.myportfolio.com, and my social handle is @bmintram. So you guys can check out this finished photo on those platforms. So now that I'm finished showing you guys my editing workflow in Lightroom Classic, I'm going to ask you guys to please subscribe to my channel, and also make sure to leave a like on this video as it helps me out as a creator. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.